Hi, it's Alaska Granny. Have you ever wondered how much flour should you store in case you wanted to make your own bread? What if it became a necessity rather than just a choice and you needed to provide the bread for your family because it wasn't available anymore? Let's say you wanted to bake one loaf of bread each week. One loaf of bread requires about 1 pound of flour. So if you bought a 5 pound bag of flour, you could make approximately 5 loaves of bread. There's always going to be the extra that we need for flouring the surfaces and sprinkling on the pans. So it's more than just the exact amount that you measure when you're making your recipe. Most bread recipes require about 2.5 or 3.5 cups of flour per loaf, and there are approximately 18 cups of flour in a 5 pound bag. So I like to figure about 1 pound per loaf. So if I wanted to bake one loaf of bread per week for an entire year, I would need about 52 pounds of flour. When you bring flour home, don't just store it in the bag. It needs to be placed into an airtight container. And you want to seal it up well, and you want to store it in a cool, dark, dry place. You can store your flour in the refrigerator or even the freezer, and one good tip is to put it in the freezer a few days as soon as you bring it home, because grains naturally have some little weevils that are in the natural grain, and that way you make sure if you freeze it that you kill off any of the little critters that could be naturally occurring in the flour. Then you won't have an infestation throughout all of your flour that can sometimes even get into all of your pantry. When you bring home any kind of grains, stick them into your freezer for a few days and then bring them back out and let them come up to room temperature so that you eliminate any problems with condensation. Then you can transfer it into an airtight container. I use a container like this in my pantry. Whenever I want to use flour, I scoop it out of here. Flour doesn't last as long as other foods, but you can probably get a year or two out of it if you store it carefully. How do you know if your flour isn't good anymore? Smell it. Does it smell okay? If it smells off, then probably it isn't going to be as tasty as it could be, and it's time to replace it. That's one of the problems with storing flour, is that it can't last for a very long time. But you can absolutely make it last longer by storing it properly. One of the options that I like to do for long-term food storage is to order flour in number 10 cans from the LDS or the Mormon Church. Anybody can order from their site. When you order the cans of food, they come just like this. This one is flour. They have all different kinds of foods, but I bought flour like this, and you get 6 of these in a box. Whenever you order from the LDS Church, you get 6 cans in the box. Each can holds about 13.5 cups of flour, so you could get 4 or a little bit more loaves of bread out of a can of flour. So if you wanted to order the number 10 cans of flour, you would need approximately 15 cans to make enough flour so that you could make one loaf of bread every week for a year. So it would be up to you how much flour you would like to order. At the beginning of the pandemic last year, when you couldn't get flour anywhere, I was so glad that I had these in my prepper pantry, and I opened one of these up, and at first it smelled a little bit like a tin can, but then as it sat on the counter, after just a few minutes, a little bit of time, that scent went away, and it was just like perfectly fresh, great new flour, and I was so glad that I have it. Flour is available in the store again, so it might be something you want to stock up on because it's so uncomfortable to want things and not be able to find them. We don't want to have that panic that we can't provide the foods that we want. While you can get foods at reasonable prices, it's a good idea to be stocking up on foods you think you're going to need. If you use sourdough starter, I always use whole wheat, because if you use just the bleached white flour, then the part that makes the sourdough that's still alive isn't there anymore. So if you want to start making sourdough, make sure you're using a whole wheat flour so that you have the activity in the live organisms in your flour. Whole wheat flour doesn't store as long as white flour, so you'll need to rotate that a little more quickly. One tip is to add a few bay leaves into your flour, and that can help repel any insects. They don't like the smell of it. And these are also called laurel leaves. You should be able to smell the aroma. If you're not sure if your bay leaves are still fresh, Put one in a cup, add a little boiling water, and see if the aroma comes off of them. And if it does, then they're still good to use. You can also crumple up a bay leaf and sprinkle it around in the corners of your pantry to help keep the bugs away. What can you do with longer term solutions? You can shop for wheat berries. It's the whole kernel of the grain. If you want to use wheat berries as a long-term solution, you can turn them into flour, but you need a very heavy-duty grinder. 2.5 cups of wheat berries equals about 3 cups of flour. A 5-gallon bucket would hold about 33 pounds of wheat berries, and so you could make approximately 25 to 30 loaves of bread from that, depending on how big of a loaf you like to make and what your recipe is. If you're planning on being able to bake bread for your family, you need to make sure that you read over your favorite recipe and stockpile all of the ingredients that go into your particular recipe. Things like yeast have been very hard to find, but they're coming and going into the store. So those are the types of foods that if you are counting on having them in the future, you need to stockpile them now. It was very hard to find these kinds of items during the beginning of the pandemic, and we just don't know what the future holds. We do know that there have been heat waves, droughts, and there have been a lot of crop losses, and there are shortages that continue to go in and out in the stores. Making sure that you have the things you need to continue to feed your family should be a priority so that every day can be the best that you can make it. If you enjoyed my video, I hope you'll share it with someone else you think might like it. Please subscribe to the Alaska Granny channel.